What is the craziest secret someone told you? My HS girlfriend told me her stepdad had been showering and sleeping with her since she was 13. I started dating her when I was 17. She was extremely experienced and very sexually active, which a young guy would enjoy, but it was over-sexual and I knew something was up. I asked her and she told me all about it. I tried to handle it, but could not. Her little sister had also just started to be molested. I told them they needed to tell their mother or I would. Well, they did, and guess what? I was basically kicked out of the relationship. I became the bad guy. I wish now that I could have helped her or dealt with it better. But I hadn't dealt with anything like that. We broke up and their family carried on. It wasn't incest, but it was wrong. She did marry and have children, and it looks like a nice situation. Unfortunately, her younger sister died of an overdose when she was in her 30s. I'm now in my 50s and this whole situation still bothers me. So when I was really young, a friend mentioned that his grandpa had big balls. That you can even notice them when he wore pants. I saw his grandpa and it was true. Later I told my parents, and my dad told me his grandpa had a hernia. When I was younger, I went to this guy's house with a couple friends, playing video games. His grandpa lived with him, and casually told me a story about how when he was in the military, a guy took 2 other guys out into the jungle because everyone thought they were gay. He didn't come back with the 2 guys. My grandpa enlisted in the Navy at 17 during the last year of World War II and was on the Pacific Theater. They had captured a bunch of Japanese and had them in makeshift holding cells on an island, atoll, and would occasionally leave the door unlocked after meal times and wait for someone to attempt to leave so they could pick them off. War is fucked up. Someone I dated, she mentioned she molested her brother when she was 18 and he was 13. I no doubt of that instantly. She was somehow surprised because the other guys I've dated didn't have an issue with it. Edit, this happened in Chicago. During a class reunion, a high school classmate admitted that cityscapes turned him on. Apparently he had a skyscraper fetish and he jerked it to images of urban city skylines lit up at night by bright lights. A woman told me she was molested by our religious leader when she was 5 years old. He was into sex strangling and would make her unconscious by depriving her of air, then sexually assault her while she was passed out. She repressed the memories, but knew bad things happened while she was with him because it went on for several years. For years ago she had a night terror. As she was falling asleep, she thought he was on top of her, so she started thrashing and threw herself out of her bed and knocked her head on the bedside table. She got a concussion and broke her neck, and all of the memories came back fully. She's a bit of a basket case now, but I believe her. Years ago a friend was watching another friend's house while they were on vacation. I went over to hang out and he told me that he found my friend's older sister's vibrator and he licked it, with the thought that the next time she uses it, it has his tongue on it. We didn't hang out too much after that. In college our biology lab was about 5 benches, with 4 to 5 people working at each one. My bench had 3 girls on it, one of whom would tell the other stories about how she was dating her uncle. The stories were all graphic, horrific, and weird. She did not have an inside voice, and the entire lab was fully aware. Not sure if it's a secret, but it should have been. When my son was young, my dad decided he should warn me of the dangers children can create. Without getting into detail, he told me that when I was 2 I tempted him into oral sex. He tried it again another day, and I told my mom. I have no memory of this, but I couldn't figure out which part was more infuriating and horrifying, the fact that he was admitting this to me like it wasn't going to fuck me up, that he was blaming 2-year-old me for asking for it, or that he thought he was protecting me by warning me about how sexy my toddler was. When I was like 10, my father bragged to me about basically torturing another kid in his high school. They called him names, locked him into lockers frequently, laughed at him crying in there, and one time, drenched him in gas and pretended to light him on fire with their cigarettes. He thought it was funny that he cried and pleaded for them not to light him on fire. He told me about these stories at dinner to calm me down, after I cried and screamed like hell when he forced me to extinguish a candle with my fingers. During grad school, one of my classmates held a get-together one evening. We were going around the room sharing something about ourselves. This girl starts telling us how she was on a debate team in college. They were traveling for a tournament and got pulled over. She then shares that she offered to fuck the cop to get out of the ticket. The cop accepts, fucks her in front of the rest of the team in their van, and they don't get a ticket. The entire room was in a state of shock. She didn't seem to think it was out of the ordinary. This girl told me she spanked her daughter until she threw up because she wet her pants when she was 18 months old, and then she had no trouble going to the bathroom. This her advice when I said my daughter was just over 2 and not quite ready for potty training. I didn't take her advice. Had a friend during childhood that told me her brother had been molesting her since she was 3 or 4. She believes her grandpa molested him as well as he did her. For context, we were 11 at the time. I told my parents about it and how she needed help. When she got older and her brother grew bigger, she a teenager, and him graduating, if she refused to have sex with him, he'd beat the hell out of her. I regularly told my parents, family members, any adult I trusted in my life who would listen and act. Not a one of them did a damn thing and called no one. I truly wish the internet had been a thing back then. It would have taken just a few clicks to know who to call, what to say, and what type of help she could get, safety she could have. I don't know if this counts as a secret, but my dad randomly told me one day that a few years before I was born my grandfather accidentally ran over a child and killed him. The kid had special needs and just ran out into the road. He was found of no wrongdoing in a court. But no one had even hinted at something like that ever happening. Probably that one client of mine told me about a son he had with another woman and that his wife doesn't know about him. But he still tries to be there. I'm just like, dude, come clean, cause eventually wife will find out if she gets suspicious over spending habits. If you had the kid years ago back before you were married, understandable, unless this is a child you had from an affair, in which case you're fucked up for that. I know a married dude who was messing around with a woman at work a couple years ago and got her pregnant. Wife found out they were messing around, but she still doesn't know about the baby. They don't work together anymore, but she'll stop by his work so he can see the kid, and he does try to send her money. He just found out his wife is pregnant. He hasn't told his girlfriend yet. I don't know how long he expects all these secrets to stay secrets, but it isn't going to be pretty when it all comes to light. I used to be a bouncer at a club, the door girl and I would always talk. We worked together for 2 years and we had some down and dirty talks before. But the one WTF thing she told me was something even I had gotten shocked at. She was 36 at the time and she told me that she, her 16-year-old daughter, and her 14-year-old son would often get naked together and have masturbating sessions together. It was also very common for them all to sleep naked together. Her father molested little girls and the only problem she had with it was that he didn't want to molest her as well. She said she was jealous that he didn't look at her that way. From all accounts, he was an amazing father that treated her like a princess. Lots of WTFs in that. Unfortunately, she refuses to get therapy to deal with this. As screwed up this is, I can understand why, since abusers often shower their victim with love, gifts, admiration, and so on. Abusers aren't usually just cut and dry in how they obtain and treat their victims. A girl that I had a friends with benefits relationship with our senior year of high school first semester of college told me that when she was around 10, her grandparents basically kidnapped her younger siblings after her parents were arrested for running a meth lab. That very night, her oldest brother had friends over, her brother went to shower, and all of his friends gang raped her. He found out and did absolutely nothing. She is fine now, has all her siblings, etc. She told me this one night while we were sharing Four Locos on the beach and watching the sunset. A lot of this thread confirms how ubiquitous childhood sex abuse is. Freud assumed all of his patients were sharing fantasies or hallucinations when he encountered the barrage of incest stories. Nothing's changed. I took a coworker out for a drink because she seemed upset and it was affecting her work performance, and I was like, sometimes PPL just need someone to listen. By the end of 2 hours and maybe 3 light beers, she was drunk. I knew she'd been molested as a kid, I knew how dysfunctional her family was, how she thought her partner was gambling, and how he wanted to be put on the title of her house, that they are fixing up together, but she was keeping it as her getaway fund. The next day, she sheepishly texted me that she didn't mean any of that stuff and to forget she said it, and I learned a valuable lesson about asking people to open up. Opposite, I went to stay with my high school best friend when we were at different universities. I was sleeping on his bedroom floor when he woke me up and said, "I have something really important to tell you." "I'm gay," he says. I looked at him like he's just told me that sandwiches are made from bread. I'm like, dude, we knew that about 10 years ago. Why did you feel you had to wake me up, cardinal sin, to tell me something I already knew? He goes, "Don't worry, I don't fancy you," and I'm like, "I don't fancy you either, so what?" Worked at the Source, which is what Radio Shack became in Canada. Had a woman call in and drastically overshare while looking at a pair of headphones about how her father abused her so bad she had incontinence her whole life, how she savored watching him die, and all about the various health complications of her and her husband. Ended up selling her new home phone and internet though, which was some nice commission. I had an ex 2 years ago who told me a story about how his little niece faked a rape accusation against one of his family members a long time ago, I think his uncle. I asked him what made him think she was faking, and his response was, she didn't like him. You could tell she was trying to ruin his life. What the fuck? Was at a friend of a friend's house during middle school one day for some reason without our mutual friend. Partway through the evening she casually mentions to me that she's not her dad's biological daughter and he doesn't know, and she was the result of her mom and oldest brother having an affair. I thought she was messing with me and I just wasn't getting the joke, so I kind of laughed it off and later mentioned to my mom that this girl played a weird prank on me. My mom just deadpan told me it was true and that the girl was wrong, her dad absolutely knew about it. This project has been cancelled. But we haven't told everyone yet. You need to continue going to meetings on how to fix it, while also going to meetings on what to replace it with. For maybe a couple of weeks. This story is kind of a 1-2 punch. We have this annual 3-day family reunion that is more like a retreat. Our one aunt has this large property and the family brings tents. Our grandmother was busy, so there's more than 100 of us. Anyway, on the second night I'm at this campfire with one of my uncles and he starts talking about how he was a delivery driver, and there were these 2 massage parlors he'd deliver to, and the order always included the same thing, like toiletries and oils and whatnot, but they also ordered like 1,000 condoms. Cue his joke about wishing he'd tried their menu. My aunt, his wife, is my godmother, anyway. WTF. Anyway, then he goes on to say that one day he showed up and the cops were walking out people in handcuffs. He kept driving. Apparently the guy who signed the client, at both locations, who was also his boss, disappeared without any explanation. This was on a Thursday, and my uncle said on Monday a completely different person was sending out weekly reports and his main point of contact. Lady I used to work with told me casually how she and her husband took his mother in to live with them when her dementia got really bad. Taking care of the woman pissed her off, so when the woman would fall and hurt herself, my ex-coworker would laugh at her or just stand and watch. She told me that they still had bloodstains on the walls where the woman would fall and hit her head open on furniture, even though years had passed since the old woman died in the hospital, after less than a year of living with them. I told my supervisor the next day, and she got fired, for unrelated reasons I'm told. She was truly a terrible employee, and I never saw her again. Someone once told me a story about how they bullied someone so much they committed suicide. He told it like it was a hilarious anecdote. Totally changed how I saw him. He went from that silly fun guy to a very creepy person. Girl that I had been getting to know and was starting to pursue a relationship with in high school. She asks if I know her cousin Chad. I said yes, we play on the same sportsing team together. To which she proceeds to tell me that she just broke up with him after a very fun sexual relationship with him, with her other cousin joining them. I got really quiet and asked for a clarification as I wasn't 100% sure I heard her correctly. She was fucking her cousins. Plural. And together. I got up and walked away. Just no. Nope. That was too much for me. Not told to me directly, my evil ex-roommate was laughing about how stupid her boyfriend was because she manipulated him into paying for an abortion that wasn't his. She thought it was absolutely hilarious that he never asked, and was truly concerned for her health and well-being. She was loudly bragging about it on the phone, and I could hear her through my bedroom wall. She's genuinely one of the worst people I've ever met. Lived in trailer parks growing up. Back when I was around 8, a girl in my neighborhood told me her dad had shown her his penis. I was young and thought it was weird, but it didn't flag for me at that time as a warning sign. A few years later, after I had moved away, it triggered in my memory. This was in the 90s, and there was no way I could check up on her, but I still think about her from time to time. I was on a school bus in high school for a trip. One of the girls, who we all knew wasn't the brightest of people, stated out loud that after her and her boyfriend had sex, that he'd then punch her in the stomach several times to kill the sperm so she wouldn't get pregnant. We all just stared in silence for a bit, then went on with different conversations, pretending it didn't happen. Bit of a long story, but here it goes. I was at work with a friend when a girl walked by. My friend stared at her from behind and said that us looks so good, I would eat the corn in her shit. Which was enough to make me think, what the fuck? But he follows it up with a brief moment of revelation and says, though, that reminds me. He proceeds to tell me an in-depth story of a girl he used to date that broke up with him after he told her he wanted her to shit on his chest. The ex-girlfriend's sister heard about this request after the breakup though and reached out to him to see if he would allow her to shit on his chest even though they weren't dating. He happily accepted. A good friend asked me once if I knew anybody that would kill someone for money. They were actively looking. I said hell no. I was shocked. It's been a few years now and I haven't spoken to said friend in quite some time now either. It freaked me out. I was on a first date and woman told me she had been raped on 2 separate occasions. It was a total non sequitur. I had no words. I was as understanding as I could be since I can't imagine what she went through. It was a very shocking thing to hear in the middle of a bite of pizza in a very nice conversation. I don't remember what I said, but we did still have a great first date. We went out a few times after that, but it was not meant to be. She was a lovely, kind, intelligent and funny woman who I really liked and was attracted to, but she was dealing with a lot of trauma from these experiences and we hit a dead end. I don't know what happened to her, but I hope she's happy. An old lady on a MBTA bus in Boston started making conversation with me. We made small talk for a few stops, at which point she thought it was a perfect opportunity to tell me about how her one true love was her cousin back in Iran. A coworker who told me to always be loyal to my wife was bragging a week later about how he took his wife's car to bang some chick, then went to bang another chick and her mom, and went home that night to bang his wife. I guess he was trying to flex a poor wife. My grandmother was pregnant before marriage. The father was someone other than my grandfather. She put the baby in a home for the mentally ill. My dad had no idea he had an older brother until after both his brother and his parents died. It explained why we weren't allowed to talk to certain family members. They knew and disagreed with my grandmother. They were the ones to spill the beans many years later. My friend's mom told me about how my friend was such a stressful child that sometimes she would drink beer while driving to take the edge off. This lady told me as if I would validate her for it. I won't. Don't drink and drive. A professor told me he found a treasure trove of information in an old library that would have shed so much light on different aspects of the civil rights movement. He used it to write his PhD thesis and then tucked it back away where no one could find it. So future scholars not only couldn't verify his conclusions, but no one else could use that data. Oh, except this wasn't a secret. He bragged about how he'd lucked out and that's why he became an academic and got a job at Stanford. I have no idea why 3 years later I was shocked when he plagiarized my work and bumped me down to 4th author on a paper I'd done the majority of the analyses for. I was an instructor and one of my students was doing okay, then started failing tests. We had exam failure interviews and I pull him aside for the interviews to see what's going on given the marked change in performance. The standard questions come up: sleep, time, techniques, then he just starts unloading how a couple he used to yiff with stopped inviting him to furry sessions and he's been depressed. I didn't know the terminology prior to this, so I had to ask some exploratory questions. I sat there, trying to be supportive while holding a poker face the entire time. 15 minutes after the revelations, he said he felt a lot better, then I headed back to the office. I kicked all the other students out of the office, put up the counseling in session sign and just had to yell a laugh at the top of my lungs to get it out of my system. Needless to say, that didn't go into the permanent record. My ex told me that he once had sex with his sister-in-law while his brother was drunk and passed out. They're still married, and the brother never found out. They still have a good relationship. He then got upset when I showed slight disgust because he was confiding in me, and I shouldn't judge him. This was one of many red flags. It was a short-lived relationship. If you can betray your own brother like that and manage to keep such a secret like it's nothing, what else are you capable of? My super religious mate of 10 years recently confided in me that he's a cuck. Each to their own, but WTF. Edit: no, I don't want to fuck his wife, that would just be weird. I don't know why he told me, but I'm sure it wasn't for that reason. Went over to the homie John's house. Chilled out for a while until his sister came home. She came into John's room where we were chilling and she said, "It's time, John." John looked at me and straight up said, "My sister and I are going to have sex right now, I think you should go." I no longer consider him the homie and haven't seen him since. Face with tears of joy, loudly crying face. During a training on DEI during a part where the message was that not only black people, but everyone needs to be an anti-racist advocate, a fellow teacher leaned over and said, "Why can't they fix their own problems? They're the ones who caused them." We weren't close, so not sure why they felt I would be on board with that. Her third husband beat the shit out of her oldest son when the kid was like 10 and ran away from the cops for a while because of it. He went to jail for a bit before getting out. She married him after that and they are still married. This guy's was one of my hubby's friends. We let him crash on our couch when hubby was 20. I was a couple months shy of 18, but we got together in freshman and senior year of HS and have been together since and now have a child, so nothing weird, and we were both underage when we got together. Anyway, we let him crash on the couch. We had a set time of 2 months tops to get a new job and save enough to get his own place. We kicked him out at 1 month because they drank together to celebrate an interview that went well, and his buddy confessed to raping his little sister when she was 12 and he was 16. I left the vicinity the rest of the night. My hubby made sure he never came near me the rest of the night. We would have kicked him out right then, but he was so drunk at that point he couldn't stand without falling over. Woke up early, woke him up, kick him out. He didn't remember anything and said he was just joking when we told him why we were kicking him out. We never spoke to him again. We tried calling the cops to file a report, but unfortunately as far as we know they didn't do anything, and we had no way to contact her or her mother. This guy was 22 when he stayed with us, so she was 18 when we were told. Edited to fix. Aged husband was 25 months until 21. I was 17 2 months till 18. We'll remove some details for privacy reasons. Friend is friends with a celeb. They were hanging out. Watched a scary movie at celeb's house. Made my friend spend the night because he was too afraid to go to sleep alone after watching it. A guy I had just started working for once fixed a boxing match. He made a deal with one of the young pugilists for a 50-50th split of the winnings. He would give less than a supreme effort in the squared circle. The guy who was supposed to pay the boxer gave the wrong boxer the money, and he figured he'd take a dive. The first boxer figured he'd get paid after the fight and went ahead. The whole match was a shit show. They danced around for 3 rounds, and eventually, I think out of boredom, one connects with a right. Both went down from that one hit, and the shit hit the fan. My boss's boss at the time called shenanigans and went into the locker room and found the money. After he pulled it out and asked the boxer to explain, the MP of the base walked in, and it looked like he was paying off the fighter. They decided they didn't have enough evidence to court-martial him, so they shipped him off to Greenland. Years later, he came back and found my boss on base. He went after my boss and really dug into his shit to get revenge. It was crazy. Unfortunately, it's a long story with lots of details, and it'd take about 1 hour and 33 minutes to tell it, start to finish. I worked with an old lady who was dying of cancer and had worked her entire adult life behind the counter of a Dunkin' Donuts, so she had no benefits and no retirement. One day, she told me angrily that the police had picked up her 45's year-old son for raping a child, but they wouldn't even tell him which child it was, so he confessed to the wrong crime. He said that a local 15-year-old girl was lying and totally flirted with him first, and the police said, "Yeah, you weren't even here for that one." That the man who was almost my stepfather is apparently sterile and that neither of his daughters are biologically his. This came up in a conversation with my mom where she then went on to say that she'd gotten pregnant by him once, and he immediately accused her of cheating. A guy I worked with literally told me he does sounding. I didn't know what it was. He told me, and I almost threw up, and he said his wife caught him doing it. If you don't know what it is, I don't recommend Googling it. But if you want to know, a male sticking a titanium rod in and out of his urethra for masturbation. My old roommate, who severely chronically overshares, would constantly be talking about her mental disorders and other childhood traumas. One day, she told me she had OCD. And before she learned how to cope with it, she'd have intrusive pedophilic thoughts about her younger sister. Her sister is 6 years younger than her. At the time they most likely would have been 12 and 18. A co-worker felt the need to tell me 2 of her 4 children were fathered by her stepfather while she lived at home with him and her mother. Her mother knew, did nothing, and the mother eventually divorced him. My co-worker then married her stepfather and had another child with him. She's now on her 2nd marriage and has had a 4th child. My roommate from college came to visit me 10 years after we graduated. He admitted to getting addicted to internet porn and jerking off while I was in the dorm room with him. So much about his behavior back then suddenly made sense, but I'll be honest, I almost let out a WTF before catching myself and instead being supportive. He was in a support program for his addiction at the time and was on the make amends part of that journey. Friend of mine had a dog that needed to be put down. He thought it was easier for the dog if he did it himself. He took it up on a trail in a nearby canyon and choked the dog to death. He said it was really strange seeing the life leave his eyes as he stared at it while he was doing it. Now I'm pretty sure he's borderline psychopathic. Not really a secret, but when I was volunteering at a daycare a couple years back, I upset a 4-year-old. I don't remember the circumstances of the situation, but instead of throwing a fit like a normal 4-year-old, she looked me dead in the eyes and said, "I'll burn your house down with your kids in it." I don't have kids, I was still a kid then, only being 16 at the time. The sad thing is she had to have heard that somewhere repeatedly for her to be able to say it the way she did. Girl I went to high school with had a German Shepherd. One day she took a shower, was getting her winter clothes from under a tote under her bed. The dog came up and started to lick her, and she let it happen until she was having sex with the dog 3 or 4 times a day. One day, she opened up about this, bragging she was full of him in first period. I stared at her with WTH, and she just had to tell someone it was eating at her. Then 3 weeks later she came to school, said I asked what was wrong. He parents came home and saw the dog going to town on her, and apparently had her hair in his mouth pulling AMD. He dad pulled the dog off and she panicked, said she was getting G something and it mounted her. Well, they put the dog down and she was sad. Now she lives alone. AMD has a German Shepherd and 2 St. Bernards since she moved out. I've never seen her date anyone. I had a boyfriend who said his sister had raped him when he was 5 and she was 12. I always hated his sister after that. She ended up dying right after giving birth to her second kid from drug overdose. When I was 17, I was talking all sexy with a girl on the phone and we arranged to hang out. While we were hanging out, we were talking about sexual things and she casually mentioned being raped by her babysitter with his kid in the room, like it was normal. I left pretty much as quickly as I could. She was looking at me like I should be turned on by it. It was so weird. Less depressing one, a friend told me once that they use a hairdryer to dry their whole body off after a shower. Not friendship ending, but it made me realize that people truly have completely different perspectives. Probably when my sister started telling me about her ex-fiancé who was in a cult, yes, a literal cult within the Pentecostal church, and that they thought it was a sin to use birth control, go to the doctor, go to the dentist, have opinions as a woman. They did not believe in planets, yes, planets. They believe that space is a hologram that the government puts up so that we can't see heaven. And for some reason, she opted not to tell us this while she was engaged to him. She waited till after she dumped him. I was 14, a female friend told me that her uncle was molesting her, but she was too afraid to speak and asked me to please not say anything. That same afternoon I went to the police station with a friend, anxious as f, and told the police everything. The next week police came to my high school and took my girlfriend. A few days later her mother called mine to thank me, and a few months later the uncle was in jail, and still is to this day. I don't know how I had the balls to do that, but I'm very proud. Tried to hook my boy up with my best friend, white girl, with my other best friend, black male, and he was my day one since we were in preschool, closer than a brother. She said she would never have sex with a black guy, but did admit late that summer privately that she was into bestiality with her dog. This was in Washington, D.C. My girlfriend at the time told me she was into bestiality, not even sure how to spell it and do not want to Google it, lol. I immediately told her I was feeling ill and needed to leave. I broke up with her before I made it out of her driveway. My friend's BF, but complicated, it's always been on and off, told me he got a vasectomy. My friend has 1 son with him. She is a single mom, though. She has been telling me about how she wants to remove her birth control and not tell him because they did make a cute kid. Also, he does maybe 2% of any child care and doesn't pay child support. It's a weird situation, but the BF is long friends with my husband. She and I were friendly, but our kids are only 6 months apart, so we hang out a lot. It's kinda a self-WTF cringe. But I've had a horrible past life, and one time when I was on day 2 of a 3-day cocaine binge, I told someone that I had arranged to have someone killed. Complete BS, and I remembered a few days later and cringed so hard. Luckily I don't do drugs and moved to a different country soon after. Edit, fuck cocaine, you're not as cool as you think you are a sound. Get off it, it's a horrible drug. One time at work I was hanging out at one of the picnic tables during lunch. One of the janitorial staff was telling stories about his time spent working at a local mental health facility. He said he worked the night shift and would have sex with women all the time. They were usually restrained. So he spent all of his time employed there, casually raping mental patients. When I was 20, I asked my 19-year-old girlfriend, whose family was Jehovah's Witnesses, how her younger brothers never saw her sneaking out of her house to come to my place. She giggled and nonchalantly said she always put for little sleep medication in their drinks so she could come have sex with me. I guess I kept dating her because she was really hot and I was horny, but after that strange revelation I always thought in the back of my head that she was kind of dangerous and I shouldn't trust her. A childhood friend had a sister who was 2 years older. One day, we were talking about sex and he just throws it out there, I fucked Linda. I put a lot of cum in her. He said it like it was normal and not a one-time thing. I didn't really know how to react. Coworker training me in making pharmaceutical drugs told me he had a past phase of life as a crack addict. Awesome dude. His name was Sam. He was one of the beat trainers and nicest coworkers I ever had. I was friends with a girl in elementary school. Educated in the Ontario Catholic school system. She confided me she was experiencing SA at home. I told our guidance counselor and principal. Their response that left 10-year Omi absolutely confused and now 30-year Omi bewildered. Sometimes the mind says no and the body says yes. It's appalling how little care there is when it's literally in some people's backyards. This happened to my best friend in high school. She told her mother and her mom didn't believe her. Instead, her mother disabled the phone jack in her bedroom so she couldn't call for help, went to tough love where you basically learn to tell your teen that you fucking hate their guts and everything they do, but still somehow love them, and removed the locks from her bedroom doors. My friend went through the school to the courts and got emancipated at the age of 16. 35 years later her story remains unchanged and her bitch mother is still married to that piece of shit. My grandpa enlisted in the Navy at 17 during the last year of World War II and was on the Pacific Theater. They had captured a bunch of Japanese and had them in makeshift holding cells on an island, atoll. And would occasionally leave the door unlocked after meal times and wait for someone to attempt to leave so they could pick them off. War is fucked up. What the fuck? What the actual fuck? My uncle was in Vietnam. He said he saw similar behavior, but it wasn't directed at other soldiers. He saw quite a bit of raping and murdering of people that were on our side though, including children. Said that racism was rampant and some people just didn't care who they killed as long as they were killing somebody. He obviously has a lot of trauma and not a lot of faith in humanity. Yeah, my dad was in Vietnam and besides the fact that he fought in the war, he never said anything else about it. One thing I found out later was from a group of Vietnam veterans. I had mentioned to them that my father was South Korean that fought in the Vietnam War and all their ears perked up. Apparently, the Korean soldiers were called the ROK, Republic of Korea, and they were the baddest mothers of them all. They would go into areas that the Americans refused to go, so they were very well respected. I had no idea. My uncle was gay in the Navy in the 80s. He and his boyfriend were tied up and beaten. His boyfriend died. My uncle became addicted to drugs and alcohol, in addition to developing schizophrenia. He went missing a few years ago. It breaks my heart thinking of the person he might have been if the world wasn't so hateful. Ex-Navy here. I heard how if they catch 2 guys in the act, those 2 guys are immediately taken off of any ship or submarine or whatever. It occurred to me later was that the Navy was saving their lives. My dad had a friend like this. His parents wanted him to be a doctor, so he said he was going to med school. He at the very least was on a college campus because that's where he and my dad met. Everyone believed he was well on his way to becoming a doctor until the night before I was born when his wife told my mother that he'd been lying the whole time and never graduated med school, probably never attended any medical classes either. His wife eventually left him and found someone much better, and he's in his 60s and still a total deadbeat. This is the niche fuckery I'm most fascinated by. I just watched a murder story that started with a guy setting up elaborate fake email conversations to explain to his dad why he couldn't get his transcripts. It's not a very well thought out plan. Parents will be asking about grades and graduation. This probably happens more than you think. I honestly blame the parents for this more than the kids. It is pretty much always the case that the parents' love's acceptance of the kids is conditional on the kids succeeding academically, typically in a particular field that the parents approve of. The kids either don't like school or aren't good at it, so they fake it. Oh my god, that poor boy. She told multiple people and not one thought to report her? Or leave her? I assume by the time you dated her brother was an adult, so there isn't really anything you could do other than show her that her behavior was disgusting. But holy shit, so many people failed that boy. I almost commented on this thread recalling when a former friend, 29 at the time, told me she got drunk and hooked up with her uncle the night before. They hooked up several more times after. Her dad's brother. She told me that in 2008, and it's still the first thing to come to mind when I hear questions like this. That's truly fucked. I have conversations with my 2 toddlers all the time that nobody is allowed to touch anybody's penis except their own, because yes, my sons have grabby hands, and as funny as it is sometimes, it's also an important teaching moment, but your dad is fucked. This is one of the most disgusting and horrifying things I've ever read. He basically told you he molested you and to not let your son tempt you. WTF. I hope you've removed him from yours and your child's life. Is your mom mentally well? Sorry, she didn't protect you, and leave and report your dad. I hope you are safe and healing. I have a 22-month-old daughter who we haven't even considered potty training yet because she's just not ready. I cannot begin to comprehend spanking an 18-month-old over potty training, let alone until she vomited. I honestly feel like puking just imagining someone doing this to a little baby. So my son was almost totally potty trained until the dog got into the bathroom and locked his hip but cheek while he was trying to get his pants up. Couple months of trying to convince him that wouldn't happen again go by with no luck. I turn on Iron Man 2 one afternoon cause I never saw it in theaters. Lil dud it transfixed on the screen. So I put him on my lap and answer his questions while we watch it. A week later has got an Iron Man Halloween costume that had been on the Walmart clearance rack. And this helmet that's designed to be worn. But it's massively too big for his 2-year-old head. One day he pees through his diaper and gets his Iron Man suit all wet. Me and the then wife, now ex, are both trying to get it off of him. He is not having it and is screaming bloody murder about not having it on. We told him he can wear it as long as he wants, but if he pees through his diaper it needs to be washed. From that day forward 1000% potty trained. Not even an accident. And that's the story of how Robert Downey Jr. potty trained my kid. LOL. There was a well-publicized story near where I live of a couple that had 3 kids. One of the kids was beaten daily. They starved him, then when they did feed him, doused his food in hot sauce and forced him to eat it just to watch him suffer. Then they would wake him up in the middle of the night, tie his hands with a rope with the other end tied to the back of the car, and they would drive and make him run or be dragged. One day, he jumped out a window, ran to the neighbors, and the parents went to prison. When my kid was 13/14, they came to me one day and asked me if someone told you a secret, but it was really bad, would it be okay to tell someone else? I said it really depends, what is it? They told me their best friend's brother was molesting their best friend and had been doing it for years. The best friend, same age as my kid, was putting up with it, but when she found out he was doing the same to their younger sister, she didn't know what to do. The abuse had been going on for a very long time. She thought she was protecting her younger sister by dealing with it until she found out he was victimizing their sister. I cannot imagine what she went through. My kid felt bad for betraying their BFF, and I told them there are some secrets that are okay to tell. Some secrets should never be kept secret. I never noticed anything when BFF was around, but looking back after I found out, that would explain why she wanted to sleep over all the time. She was a regular fixture at our place. Police CAS were involved. He was removed from the home. My kid had to testify in court. It's been 15 years and BFF is doing much better. She spiraled for a bit, understandably, but she seems to be happy, healthy, and doing okay. I have 3 tits. I broke my xiphoid process and it now sticks out of my rib cage. I am a slightly overweight guy in his 50s, so it is almost the same size as my man boobs. I work on breast cancer and sometimes I volunteer as a test subject. I always point out my 3rd boob and reference total recall to help break the tension. Just because we work on cancer doesn't mean we have to be serious all the time. My great-grandfather bought my grandma a car when she was 12, this would have been in the early 30s, and she ran over a kid playing in the road when she was driving to church. I don't know any details beyond the fact that the kid lived and my great-grandfather took care of the kid somehow. Not sure if he paid for the kid's education or what. I know a married dude who was messing around with a woman at work a couple years ago and got her pregnant. Wife found out they were messing around, but she still doesn't know about the baby. They don't work together anymore, but she'll stop by his work so he can see the kid, and he does try to send her money. he just found out his wife is pregnant. He hasn't told his girlfriend yet. I don't know how long he expects all these secrets to stay secrets, but it isn't going to be pretty when it all comes to light. As screwed up this is, I can understand why, since abusers often shower their victim with love, gifts, admiration, and so on. Abusers aren't usually just cut and dry in how they obtain and treat their victims. One of my friends likes to say things like this in public on purpose. Anyway, that's why they had to cut off my tail, and that's my second favorite time of having hemorrhoids. Now don't you poop in the car this time, stuff like that, something weird and off the wall loud enough for people to overhear. Have a friend that I've known since first grade. Something was always off about him compared to everyone else at that time. Between school schedule or switching schools, we didn't see much of each other from 6th to 12th grade. We'd run into each other after high school, hang out occasionally. Think it was about 21 to 22, he came out as gay. My response, finally. Biggest hug, we all fucking knew it. Love YA still, brother. The quasi-worry in his face melted away and he was so happy. Then he asked, how long have you known? Dude, since day one technically. A guy at my high school told me he'd thought about fucking the family dog and almost went through with it. I really hope the almost part was true. He dropped out a few months later and I haven't seen him since. Really hope he hasn't fucked any dog since. Or ever, really. Some dude in school told all of us fellow students that were stuck in the teacher's office without supervision for some reason, maybe we missed a test, that he let his dog lick whipped cream off of his balls. He was a jock. We were disgusted. I knew a guy in high school whose mom got caught doing this because she wasn't expecting a surprise party. She used peanut butter and her nickname became Jif. I worked in our small town 3-aisle grocery store. One day, she came in, and as I was ringing her up, my tall coworker went to the end of the farthest row and starting waving jars of Jif peanut butter over the aisle where I could clearly see them and she clearly couldn't. I was 16 or 17 and it took every fiber of my being to not break down laughing. In the days before my grandpa passed away, he would babble about all sorts of shit no one could understand. Basically, I'm just making noises with words that came through occasionally. The night before he went, he sat up and clear as day started telling everyone that the red-eyed rooster was coming to get him and that he was scared. That fucked me up for a few years. Scary shit. We took care of my mother-in-law for a year. She would fall and hurt herself a lot. I just did everything I could to fool-proof the house and the places she was in and immediately come help her whenever she fell. But I can't imagine doing anything different. And I wasn't happy hearing that we were going to have her come and stay with us originally. But I grew to love her and felt so bad for her and her situation. To me, that is just common human empathy. It's horrific to hear about someone behaving that way, especially in a situation that I can relate so much to it because I've lived through it and behaved in a very different way, in a more morally responsible and emotionally responsible way. Thank you for sharing. Thanks. I'm sorry to hear about that. Poor lady who went through so much suffering. I'd met someone like that, although online. They were bragging to me about how they made 2 people take their own lives, and he was going to make me take my own life too. So fucked up. Sometimes I still can't believe that people like that actually exist. Was in the military with a guy from Tennessee in the 1970s. He went home on leave one time and brought back a mason jar of moonshine. When he showed it to me, he said, "Take a drink, it's only been put through once," and I said, "Put through what?" He replied, "A car radiator," and I was like, "Nope, I'm not drinking anything that went through a car radiator." LOL. Military was my first experience with moonshine as well. I had a buddy from a sundown town, TX, just randomly pop out a mason jar of moonshine one night while drinking at his, you guessed it, trailer. I had tears in my eyes before it even touched my lips. First time I tried moonshine, it was made in the southern Oklahoma backwoods by a friend's cousin. Peach flavored. I was handed a mason jar with no context, and took a swig. It tasted like straight syrup from a can of peaches, no kick, no bite. Pussy juice, I a whiskey drinker, thought. Until 16 seconds later, when I was asleep on the floor of a pontoon boat in the middle of the lake, with one tit out, full of the best and most vivid dreams of my life. Making moonshine isn't all that WTF. Not sure on the exact laws, but it's legal within restrictions. My cousin makes it. Now there are WTF, unsanitary, and dangerous ways people go about making it. But using the right equipment and methods, it's not that different from making wine or beer. Now, someone got lucky in that story. Only, whether it was the sister who apparently wanted to try it and got to, the friend who got his fantasy fulfilled, or the ex who managed to escape your friend's weird sexual inquiries, remains to be decided. I've started discussing things like that more openly in that way myself. I think that's part of the reason we still have such an issue in society with that sort of thing. We can't fix something if we never talk about it. My sister-in-law drank a little during her first pregnancy with my nephew and nothing happened, so she picked it up during her second pregnancy. My niece 100% has mild FAS. Imagine fucking up someone's life before they are born. My mother has never talked to her again. She doesn't know why. She think they just got in a fight. Mum isn't dropping the FAS card, they can figure that out on their own. But when she was born she had all the signs. She's not horrible, but my nephew is top of his class and she's 2 years behind in everything. I mean, let's be fair here, in other countries and cultures it's pretty normal for someone to marry a cousin. And up until fairly recently it was pretty common in the United States as well. Not that I'm saying that it's a great idea or anything like that, but Iran is one of those countries. Pretty damn normal, unfortunately, for a lot of people with OCD. Its party trick is to take the darkest things possible and convince you that you're not only capable of them, but secretly want to do them. It's 24/7 mental torture. Like seriously, probably not something to share with a roommate, but this isn't uncommon for OCD sufferers. It's the same as having intrusive violent thoughts. It rarely means the sufferer has any desire to inflict violence, their brain just likes to throw distressing spaghetti at the wall to torment them with. Yep, friend is a middle school teacher. Long, incredibly sad story, somewhat shorter. Mom had a daughter, dad was 100% out of the picture, mom finds new boyfriend, boyfriend essays daughter, repeatedly, daughter finds courage to go to mom and mom gets angry at daughter for ruining her relationship with the boyfriend. Daughter had to get help from a school social worker. The lowest rung of hell would be too kind for that POS mother. What a bitch. I asked my mother why she never told her mom. She said that my grandmother would have undoubtedly ended up in jail for murder. Tragically, my aunt was beaten to death by her husband. She was in a wheelchair and sick at the time too. When he was released, my grandmother was an alcoholic at the loss of her daughter and other children. He approached her with a smile showing new false teeth. My grandmother picked up a beer bottle and smashed it over his head. Punched the guy in the mouth and those teeth shattered like pearls. So, I get why my mom feared telling her. It's frustrating to come across. I left my abusive family of origin because while they could convince me I was dirt beneath their feet, nothing could convince me that my kids were. I didn't tolerate it and now I am the villain in their story. I am happy to be because it means my kids are safe. My stepdad molested me and my stepbrother raped me. Happened for years and mom didn't care. It stopped when she was forced to send me into foster care, leave her husband, or send me with my dad. 2 weeks later, I was living with my dad. My grandfather was at Guadalcanal as an 18-year-old Marine. He definitely saw some stuff. One story I heard as a kid around 8 to 10 was that he came up on 2 Japanese soldiers upping a 9-year-old girl and shot both point blank in the head. I don't know how factual it was. I do know he had a signed letter from POTUS Reagan. I don't remember what it said all these years later, framed on his wall. Grandpa was a very angry man and died when I was around 9 or 10. He drank a lot after the war and ended up wrapping his car around a tree in a remote area. He wasn't found for a day or two and had snapped his neck. He spent the last 30 years of his life as a quadriplegic. My adult self knows why and empathizes with him. Child me was terrified of him and hated him. Yeah, my dad was in Vietnam and besides the fact that he fought in the war, he never said anything else about it. One thing I found out later was from a group of Vietnam veterans. I had mentioned to them that my father was South Korean that fought in the Vietnam War and all their ears perked up. Apparently, the Korean soldiers were called the ROK, Republic of Korea, and they were the baddest mothers of them all. They would go into areas that the Americans refused to go, so they were very well respected. I had no idea. ROK troops actually made an effort to learn to speak Vietnamese because they didn't trust the ARVN translators and suspected some were actually VC. They also really hated communism because of their conflict with North Korea. So they had a pretty fearsome reputation despite being not as well armed as US or ARVN troops. People tend to treat these as synonymous. My ex-friend knocked up a girl that was sterile. I repeatedly told him there was no way as she still had her ovaries, uterus, and everything else. She was also like 18. Last I saw he denies the kid is his even though it's a spitting image. So it wasn't even an uncle by marriage? That would still be a big no in my book, but we aren't Targaryens here. There are 4 billion men on this planet and you intentionally fuck one you are very closely related to. As a mum to 2 young kids, this one absolutely breaks my heart. Imagining a sweet, innocent child being beaten over a natural bodily occurrence makes me feel ill. Imagine how much the poor little one was crying loudly crying face. I did not do either of those things because her daughter was 25 years old when she told me this story and I kind of doubt CPS or my coworker would have cared. I did think she was awful, but the horse was pretty well out of the barn at that point. Thank you. My mother is a narcissist and she said when I was a baby she was jealous of me because when my dad came home from work he went straight into my room to hug and kiss me first. She fucked up my entire life. She hated me and blamed me for everything that ever went wrong in the family, so I was scapegoated, and if my dad did anything to help me she would give him hell, so he was scapegoated too. She ruined my life. My brothers were allowed to bully me and my younger brother tormented me my whole life. Calling me fat, stupid, dumb and ugly and you deserve to die. I heard this so many times for so many years. OMG. She put me in 1 halfway houses, crisis centers, and one time at age 13 put me in a mental institution for 6 months. When I arrived home my little brother said, "Oh, your back life is so much better when you're not around," and when I walked into my room it had been given to him. I had no bedroom and had to sleep in the basement. God. I hated myself forever. I was able to be the first in the family to get a college degree and the first to own my own home. Problem is I still hate myself. Spent most of my life in therapy, never married, never had children because my mother made it clear to me that getting married and having children is hell. I was 36 when I found out people enjoy their family. Really? I had no idea, no kidding. My life has been hell. I wish she had never had me. Please don't have children if you can't accept the responsibilities of motherhood. I truly wish it could have been that way for her. I have no idea why so many PPL kept quiet when my whole life I'd been taught to speak out about these things. Dozens of people knew and looked the other way. My aunties knew her and she was so ingrained in our family she'd often be asked to do babysitting jobs for the kids, mostly just watching TV while the kids slept and the parents bar hopped, but even they never bothered to say a word. I will never understand any of it. My mom's friend was over for dinner and she was talking about how angry she was at her son. A few weeks prior, she had gotten a call from him that he was at the hospital and she needed to come down. He meets her in the lobby and explained that his girlfriend just had their baby. He never told his mom his girlfriend was pregnant, bold for a reason. Okay, she is a grandma now, pissed but roll with the punches, right? Ha ha. She was at home the very next day and she gets a call from her son that he is in the hospital and for her to come down again. Thinking something was wrong with the baby she rushes over. He meets her in the lobby. His second girlfriend had a baby. 2 babies, 1 night apart, grandma twice over. Carolyn, you are a champ. I was around 12 when I heard that story and never forgot it. I'm pretty sure the age of consent in Mississippi is 16. Although I haven't delved into if there's an upper limit on how old somebody can be and still sleep with the 16-year-old, because that's a weirdest thing to look up. Growing up I didn't understand why my uncle showered my cousin with praise and gifts and affection, but not me and my siblings. But it was literally because they were raping him. I don't talk to my uncles at all, and if I ever saw one again I'd have to restrain myself from attacking him. Yet my poor cousin still is on good terms with him. Why yes, actually. I dug about it. I insisted on how he could know she was mad and what she'd even be mad about. Nothing. He just kept saying the same old thing. You can tell she hated him. That's all he said. I'm sorry, but no, that's gross. He was somewhere in his 40s when we had this conversation, but I'm not sure exactly how old though. We were like 13-14s when this was told to me, and I remember just being like, oh. Okay then, and not following up to much. If I had to guess he'd have been somewhere in his 20s or 30s when it happened. Military was my first experience with moonshine as well. I had a buddy from a sundown town, TX, just randomly pop out a mason jar of moonshine one night while drinking at his, you guessed it, trailer. I had tears in my eyes before it even touched my lips. Real apple pie moonshine is the tits. So is cherry. Dangerous shit though, goes down really easily for something that is 180 proof. Straight moonshine might as well be rubbing alcohol, but somehow still tastes better than most vodka. Burns like a motherfucker but is smooth at the same time. Imagine having a sister who was first in her class at Yale. A brother who was first at the Julian. Imagine mom started drinking wine for pain with your pregnancy. Imagine being really smart, in some areas, but can't do math. I can use Excel to do things, but give me a calculator and pencil, and ask for Algebra 1. Nope. Flunked algebra in 12 grades. Then in college. But my resume includes system analysis at MIT, Visa, Apple, because I do people really well. I understand now that it's pretty common OCD stuff. I just didn't want to hear about it from a new roommate that I wasn't really close with, especially when I didn't ask at all and she just dumped it on me one night. She had tons of other stuff going on and every time we spoke she'd just drop something like this without any provocation. Really sad looking back, but at the time it made me super uncomfortable. What a bitch. I asked my mother why she never told her mom. She said that my grandmother would have undoubtedly ended up in jail for murder. Tragically, my aunt was beaten to death by her husband. She was in a wheelchair and sick at the time too. When he was released, my grandmother was an alcoholic at the loss of her daughter and other children. He approached her with a smile showing new false teeth. My grandmother picked up a beer bottle and smashed it over his head. Punched the guy in the mouth and those teeth shattered like pearls. So, I get why my mom feared telling her. My ex-wife is in a relationship with a man, freshly out of prison, for lewd acts with a minor under 16, and 2 protection order violations, while on parole for domestic assault, DAW dangerous weapon, DA by strangulation and kidnapping. She says every issue in her life is because her mom neglected her and her mom's boyfriends essayed her. I'm hoping I stopped some generational trauma, but only time will tell. The day I got a notification about his release date, I hired an attorney and got emergency custody of my 2 young daughters. She's so mad at me for ruining her relationship, and I'm a bitter ex who's jealous she's happy like nah bitch, I'm remarried, another kid, new job, new area, more money, less crazy in my life. Same, but it was number 2, 3 for doing it to 6, 7, 8 mom didn't drink, but when she found out about 1, me and 4, she couldn't imagine that it happened more than once or to more than one child. It was rug swept for years until number 6 had a mental breakdown and things just imploded. She and my dad wish we would talk to the other ones. If they had just done the hard work when we were kids, our family wouldn't be in shambles now. I'm sorry you had to deal with this too. It's traumatic, but it 100% drives the way I parent. That's the price mom was willing to pay to have a provider in the home. Chances are she was actively pushing her 2 daughters at the stepfather so she wouldn't have to engage herself. Unfortunately, there's a lot of women out there like that. They hate their own kids and use them as bargaining chips to get what they want. My dad was in a reconnaissance unit in the army. He arrived in April 1968. Bad time to be there, but it's never good in a recon unit because it's so dangerous, like 9 guys going first to go find the enemy. They call the troops in, good lord. Anyway, he was 18, fucked him up good. I was scared to death of him growing up, but really, I have to hand it to the guy. He went to work every day, never complained, and we were poor, but he always made sure we were fed and warm. However, his PTSD was brutal and he didn't have the skill set to deal with it when he was younger, and it made for a very rough childhood for me. However, now he gets therapy and other services like Veterans Affairs, and he doesn't have those negative behaviors anymore other than the functional alcoholic thing, but he is 76, won't drive after drinking, he is responsible about it, and that man really saw some shit. I figure, let him have his beer. We have a really great relationship now, and I am grateful for the work he put into work through a lot of his demons. War really sucks. He has told me some objectively horrific stories and makes it clear that what he can't say out loud, those stories are much, much worse. He said he has tried to talk to his therapist about them and he opens his mouth to speak and the words won't come out. He said it's super weird. No one is really built for seeing that kind of shit, but damn, at 18, 19, 20? Like, you haven't even lived yet and you are seeing the stuff of nightmares. It's no wonder people get so fucked up by it. ROK troops actually made an effort to learn to speak Vietnamese because they didn't trust the ARVN translators and suspected some were actually VC. They also really hated communism because of their conflict with North Korea. So they had a pretty fearsome reputation despite being not as well armed as US or ARVN troops. I worked with a Vietnam vet and talked of nighttime shellings. We were up all night having arty dropped on us, but those rocks in the next camp over were sleeping like babies. I asked why, and he said, the rocks didn't fuck around. They'd just go wipe out a village to take revenge. I found my step-grandfather's stash of pictures from his time in Vietnam and Laos after he died. They were bad. Really, really bad. I burned them before my grandmother could see them. May he rest in peace. Jennifer Pang. Little psychopath. She set up her parents to be killed, but only her mother died. The dad was shot but survived. All this because the parents discovered she was hanging with her drug dealer BF instead of going to nursing school and gave her an ultimatum. Drop the BF and really go to school or be kicked out of the house. The parents were willing to give her a second chance, and she still didn't appreciate it to the point of wanting them dead. There's a great YouTube vid of her masterful interrogation by an RCMP detective leading to her eventual confession. I was told I'd never bear my own children. We have 4 now. My husband still denies our oldest even though they're the same LOL, and our oldest and youngest could both be twins in different timelines. I've told him for years to go ahead and get paternity tests for all 4 because I'm sick and tired of any of them being denied as his. They're all 100% his. That or the sleep paralysis demons face with tears of joy. Infertile means you have a difficult time getting pregnant, takes greater than 1 year of trying to conceive to get pregnant. Sterility is confirmed inability to conceive, like NO sperm count on analysis. My husband's cousin married her fiancé even after finding out he'd gotten her and his girlfriend pregnant at the same time. Goes on to have 2 more kids with her now husband. Finds out he's been cheating on her. How TF was she surprised? Divorces him. The story actually goes on and gets worse, but not relevant to this discussion. Thirded. All that stuff is pretty common, or at least, in my experience, seems like you can get 2 hours into convo with nearly anyone and find out they were molested or assaulted etc., and every family is dysfunctional, and I wish it were more normalized to share openly, society would be healthier. Straight moonshine should taste a bit sweet. It's corn whiskey. I've hiked across some illegal stills, and the first sign is that the air smells like sweet corn. Fun fact, at least around Pocahontas, WV, the best moonshine comes from the back of an old sedan at a bonfire. The moonshiner gives a jar to the best-looking woman and she goes on her way sharing it with anyone she meets. When asked where she got it from, she points them to the car, and the moonshiner has a new customer. After years of this, the best-looking woman starts showing the effects of the moonshine and another woman inadvertently replaces her. That former woman is now called a mountain mama. Listen. Strange men driving old sedans distributing mason jars to beautiful women is no basis for a system of government. Supreme executive power derives from a mandate from the masses, not from some farcical bonfire ceremony. I can confirm this. I got a hold of some real apple pie shine. It's so smooth. And it'll hit you so hard that you won't expect it. This was made by one of those hillbillies that live down in the hills of Kentucky too. So you know it's good. Kentucky as West Virginia moonshine is the only moonshine. I always roll my eyes when someone says they have a bottle of shine and break out that flavored vodka shit that's like 40 proof you can buy at a liquor store. If it wasn't cooked up by a dude named Bubba, it ain't moonshine. Your story is my story. We had the same dad. Mine was in the first air cave in 66-67s. I had the same horrible childhood, and just now at 80 is he getting nicer due to him getting a therapist at the VA. There's good evidence via functional MRI scans that PTSD reduces blood flow to Broca's area, the parts of the brain in the frontal cortex linked with speech production. That feeling like the words won't come out of his mouth isn't just a feeling, there's good science that says the ability to describe the trauma is genuinely impaired in a way we can objectively observe and measure. I was there daily as a 4-year-old after preschool until my mom could pick me up. He yelled at me a lot and was pretty scary to be around, although I knew he couldn't get out of bed. I know he drank a lot and was rumored to beat his wife and children. My mother was the youngest of 6 kids, and his accident occurred when she was maybe 3 months old. Grandma took care of him. He obviously couldn't work, so the level of poverty was significant. My mom started working at 12 and paying her mother rent. All the siblings worked to pay for their household. Like I mentioned, I absolutely hated him as a child. As a nearly 50-year-old woman, I am so sad for him. I know now he was so incredibly scarred. Couple that with paralysis and watching his family barely survive, I can't imagine how he managed, and honestly believe he didn't end his own life because he had no way to do it, being paralyzed from the neck to shoulders down. I believe any kind of war deployment leaves scars. My grandfather was in Vietnam. Got a Purple Heart for being stabbed in the back. He had nightmares every night. We never tried to wake him up or be loud once he had gone to bed, as he'd woken up in the midst of flashbacks previously. Most gentle guy though during the day. Right, like anyone, but especially children engaging in that with foreign military occupation personnel is basically under duress. They already know these invaders can take what they want without repercussions, so it's hardly consenting in the best circumstances. But with kids and adults, that's assault. I am not saying it's okay, however, the genetic risk for first cousins having children is only slightly higher than normal. The problem comes, like with the Habsburgs, from doing that over and over and over and. Listen. Strange men driving old sedans distributing mason jars to beautiful women is no basis for a system of government. Supreme executive power derives from a mandate from the masses, not from some farcical bonfire ceremony. Kentucky at West Virginia moonshine is the only moonshine. I always roll my eyes when someone says they have a bottle of Shine and break out that flavored vodka shit that's like 40 proof you can buy at a liquor store. If it wasn't cooked up by a dude named Bubba, it ain't moonshine. She healed as well as she could. She straightened herself out long before we were born. I only ever knew her as kind and warm. She died in 1989 at 73. Even now, when I go home, I hear stories from the elders about her. She was one of the most outspoken leaders of our community. I remember sitting outside the hospital and I saw my cousin with her father, the one who killed my aunt. He was old, decrepit, and pissing himself in a wheelchair. He died a miserly old drunk. Please consider subscribing if you enjoyed. Love.